We've been after Chris Landreth for quite a while, and there was a time when we didn't think we could get him because he's been on a tear ever since he won that Oscar. And then luckily he agreed to come, so he's with us today, Chris Landreth. He is the latest in a fairly long line of National Film Board-backed animators, all the way back, I guess, to the legendary Norman. We all know about Norman McLaren. But this recent Oscar win really did something else, which is it brought to the attention of a whole lot of people this radical innovation, this startling innovation in technique that Chris calls psychorealism. I hope he talks about that. I'm not sure exactly what he will talk to you about. I hope we get to see some work. Why don't you come up here, Chris? But this is a fascinating idea and a fascinating execution where you get to see both the outer character and the inner character at the same time. I hope somebody treats me like that someday. Thank you, Chris.
Well, fortunately, Moses, that's actually the title of the talk. I couldn't think of anything else to call it, so let's go to it. Yes, it's called psychorealism. Basically, the notion of psychorealism, as I like to define it, is, okay, I'm in computer animation. I've been doing computer animation for about 15 years, and I've really, just every year of that, I've really loved being in it, but now I kind of hate it. It's not so much that I hate doing it, but I hate seeing it. I hate seeing most of what computer animation has become these days. That is, the kind of stuff you see in any feature film that has a budget of over $20 million is bound to use CG in one way or another. And once you get up to budgets of $100 to $150 million, then you start to see really spectacular utter crap, or at least a lot of it tends to be that way. Now, I'm being a little glib about that. I mean, the films that come out, that have come out from DreamWorks and Pixar are actually extremely good films. They're great films, but people look at that as being the standard of what computer-generated imagery filmmaking can be, and it is quite limiting. A lot of that problem has been from the pursuit of photorealism, the idea of being able to recreate reality in a way that is uncanny, that is substitutable for real life. There's certainly a great exercise in that. It's kind of a form of masturbation. It's an exercise that you try to attain, but it's like the dog chasing after a fender of a moving car. Once you attain that, what do you do with it? There's a limitation there. For me, the tools that are available with computer animation can do a lot more. I feel can do a lot more than that, and that's why, yeah, great. That's why I sort of go in this vein, which is rather than the literal photorealism that you can attain now with CGI, what if you're able to use it to depict the realism of a character's emotional and spiritual state? Now you're getting into something which is more ordinary, but in making that ordinary visible, you make it more glorious. I'm just thinking of a quote, actually, from Alexander Payne, the guy who did Sideways. I'm going to try to remember it here. He said something like, I look forward to the era in cinema where the merit of a film is based on its proximity to real life rather than its distance from it. So, I mean, the notion there is that you're able to take the ordinariness of human experience and turn it into something extraordinary. That's something that I think CGI is really capable of doing. So a number of other examples here, but I mean, where I'm coming from is that this has not been explored a whole lot. It's relatively new. It's been around for about 15 years or so. There are some earlier examples, but they're pretty rare. So, I mean, elements about this, which I really dig, are things like the fact that the dialogue is unscripted. You get ums and stutters and pops and pauses and stuff in the dialogue that you hear that in many ways you can't possibly script. You cannot possibly act or emote. This is stuff that really comes from the brain, comes so spontaneously that there's, I think, dramatic glory in that stuff. The soundtrack tends to be ambient. You tend to hear, cars and traffic and sounds that are not particularly, high fidelity stuff. And then the interesting part is, the visual. These first two things are audio. The idea of stripping away the live action video and implanting something which is interpretive or allegorical or comes from one's sort of inner vision about what is actually, subjectively going on with the subject matter. Ryan Larkin, I mean, a lot of you may know at this point that Ryan Larkin himself was an animator. He's a friend of mine. He's 63 years old now. And he was, he had a very glorious time during the mid-'60s and early '70s at the National Film Board. He was probably their most famous or infamous guy there. Did, this still from The Piece in the Middle, Walking, he was nominated for an Academy Award in 1969 for. So I met him 5 years ago and hung out with him for a week and just got, this, what I thought was one of the most extraordinary human stories that I had personally been in contact with. And, a few months later, approached him about doing a documentary about him. And to my amazement, he was incredibly gracious about doing it. So I started by just interviewing him and taking a few pictures of him without having any real sense of where this was going to go. This is mugshot of him, during his enfant terrible days. He was a superstar at the National Film Board. This is Ryan as I saw him when I hung out with him, interviewed him, and photographed him. Here's a number of other photographs that I took in order to create a quick mock-up. And this is actually also very early on in the production process, where I just slammed out these CG sculptures, if you will, to determine what Ryan might look like and how he might move and articulate. So that's Ryan. This is a close-up of him where I'm really testing out the texture. You see, there's a texture map based on the photographs that I took that were put onto this CG model. Okay, so there's Ryan. That's me. And what I needed to do here was to apply that kind of similar, what do I look like? I would say the process was, don't give it too much thought, but start drawing. And this is what came out of that, which was, you're starting to see that same kind of decimation, these kind of gouges and growths and stuff. In the film Ryan, I explain these things at the very beginning of the film, kind of set up the premise of what this is about. These are, psychological things that happen to me, wounds and stuff. I mentioned like my unbridled romantic worldview permanently shattered, and those are those sort of striped gashes that you see across his face there. I put myself in the film like that, but I'm not singling myself out, and I'm not singling Ryan out. I mean, the point that I'm getting at, or I hope that gets across, is that we're all broken in some way or another. We all have these psychological gashes and pops and growths and weird stuff going on. That's what makes us interesting people, is the breakages that we have in our dysfunctionalities. So, if we're able to portray them visually, I think we've got an interesting way of showing people and telling stories. So that's where I was coming from with this character, Chris. There's a close-up of one of the early tests that we did to show that we had the realistic element and we had this kind of psychological element layered on it. So that's Chris. I'm going to see if I can play this thing. No, we'll just go ahead and I'll just say a couple of things about the story here, which is getting back to Alexander Payne's quote. What I was after with the story of Ryan is not that this was necessarily an extraordinary guy in an extraordinary place. Ryan does have this great element of genius, and that's what makes him such a luminary figure, and that is well-deserved because he did some great, great stuff. But the story that I'm trying to get across in Ryan is way more one of ordinariness. There's a commonality in the story that we're talking about involving alcoholism, drug addiction, mental illness, dysfunctionalities of all sorts that we deal with in our everyday lives as human beings. And that's what I hope makes the story work, and I think that's where we're going with the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do with CG here. So I'll shut up now, and I think we probably just have enough time to show a 5 or 6 minute clip of the film Ryan. Okay? Great. I really do hope that you get back into some serious creative work. That was one thing I wanted to say. The other thing that I wanted to say, I'm going to say one thing, one concern that I have about you, which is your alcohol.
Which is what?
Your alcohol.
My alcohol?
Yes, your alcohol. Your alcoholic consumption is, as you know, pretty high. I want you to consider beating alcohol in the same way that you beat cocaine?
What? There's nothing I enjoy more than a good glass of cold beer. Am I supposed to give that up for like tea or something? No, can't do that.
I personally want to see you around, and I personally want to see you thrive, Ryan.
Fry?
Not fried. I want to see you thrive.
What? Who's going to buy my creations? You know? What's in it for me? I don't create because I've been ripped off so fucking much, I decided to stop creating. Creativity, what do you think I can do, you know? I cannot do anything. I've been deprived. Deprivation is the most devastating thing. I will surely, you know, be right on deck. I'll give up booze and give up cigarettes and right on deck. If somebody gives me some money, one cannot do anything at all, without the power of money.